Beneath the Backcountry by P.J. Taylor. Chapter 4. The radio crackled in the dark like a campfire that refused to go out. James kept his hand near the dial, as if steadying it would make the garbled voices any clearer. The Pine Hollow station lay behind them now, its ruins swallowed in a thin veil of smoke and silence. They hadn't spoken much on the trail out. Too much had happened too quickly, and even Isabel, who usually filled the air with chatter, marched quietly, her eyes fixed on the ground. James glanced back at the others as they hiked. Evan walked a few paces behind Isabel, his stride too measured, too quiet, as if he were deliberately planting each boot print. The beam from his headlamp washed across the trees in long, nervous sweeps. His expression was unreadable, and that bothered James. "Get a grip," James told himself. "You're wound up, that's all. Guy's just doing his job." Still, there was something about Evan that itched at the back of James's mind like a burr under a sock. He filed it away, same as he always did when something didn't add up. He'd been a ranger long enough to know that paranoia killed judgment faster than a bear on a blind trail. "Radio's getting more chatter the farther we get from Hollow," Thomas said finally, breaking the silence. His voice carried the gravel of exhaustion. "Fish and Game reported 2 hikers missing near Clearwater Ridge. Been out since morning, no contact. Storm's rolling in, so they want us to divert and help the search." James nodded. Clearwater Ridge was a good half-day's trek north, but with Pine Hollow out of commission, they couldn't exactly ignore the call. "We'll move fast. How long ago did they go missing?" "Reported just before dusk. Group of 4 split up after a disagreement. 2 made it back to camp. The other 2 haven't turned up." James adjusted the strap of his pack. "Classic case. Let's just hope it's not turning into a body recovery." Isabel winced but didn't speak. She'd seen enough of those to know how they usually ended. The group pressed on, their boots crunching over frost-hardened earth. The temperature had dropped steadily since nightfall, and their breath rose in clouds that drifted through their headlamp beams. The forest pressed close, black and silent. They reached a clearing near midnight, where the trees thinned and revealed the jagged shoulders of Clearwater Ridge. The ridge loomed like a wall of broken stone, its crown hidden by a smear of low clouds. A thin scent of smoke tugged at James's nose. Not campfire smoke, sharper, more metallic. Lightning had struck somewhere nearby. Thomas noticed it too. "We may have a fire starting up." "Great," Isabel muttered. James swept his lamp across the clearing. No smoke column yet, but the air was telling the truth. "We'll mark it, log it for dispatch once we've got better reception. Missing hikers come first." They broke into 2 teams. Thomas and Isabel took the eastern slope, while James and Evan moved along the western side. The plan was simple: cover ground, call out, sweep the terrain for footprints or signs of movement. The climb was steep and James's thighs burned again as he picked his way over loose rock. Evan followed without a sound. That was what gnawed at James again. Most men breathed hard, muttered curses, or made some kind of racket hauling themselves uphill. Evan moved like a shadow, never breaking rhythm. "Ever worked search and rescue before?" James asked, if only to break the quiet. "Plenty," Evan said. His tone was flat, clipped. "People get lost. I find them." That was all he said. James frowned, but let it go. They paused near an outcrop where the ground leveled out. James raised the radio. "Thomas, you copy?" Static hissed, followed by Thomas's voice. "Copy. Found a trail of prints heading north. Might belong to our hikers. Fresh. We'll follow." "Roger that. We're sweeping west." James lowered the radio and adjusted his pack. Evan crouched suddenly, his headlamp beam locking onto something in the dirt. James knelt beside him. There are faint impressions. Boot prints, smaller than his own. 2 sets side by side. "They were here," James said. "Headed uphill." Evan's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. "Not long ago either. Less than an hour." James arched a brow. "You sure about that?" Evan didn't answer right away. He just stared at the prints as if reading something James couldn't see. Then he stood and shouldered his pack. "Yeah, let's move." Something about the way he said it made James's skin prickle. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe Evan had a knack for tracking. sharper eyesight. Still, James made a note of it. The ridge grew steeper, and the forest thinned into windswept rock fields. The storm Thomas had mentioned was rolling closer, its belly flashing with distant lightning. The smell of ozone rode the wind. James called out the hikers' names every few minutes, but only the wind answered. Then faint, desperate came a reply. "Over here!" James spun, light flashing across jagged stone. A woman's voice, thin and ragged. They scrambled toward it, slipping over shale until the beam of his headlamp caught movement. Two figures huddled against a boulder. The hikers, both women wrapped in thin jackets, their faces pale with cold and fear. "Rangers," James called, raising a hand. "You're safe now." The nearer one sobbed with relief, clutching at him as he knelt beside her. "We thought we were going to die out here. We couldn't find the trail back. We heard—" She broke off, trembling. "What did you hear?" James asked, his tone calm. Her eyes darted toward the tree line. "Something moving. Not a bear. Not anything I've ever seen." James felt the hairs on his neck rise. He forced a reassuring smile. "Could have been the storm. Wind makes the forest sound alive. You're safe now." But inside, his gut twisted. Evan stood a few feet away. Evan, with his jet black hair and unnervingly pale blue eyes, watching the tree line with a stillness that unnerved James. His lamp beam didn't shake. He wasn't even breathing hard. For a moment in the harsh white glow, his pupils seemed slit vertical, not round. James blinked and they were normal again. Stress. You're seeing things that aren't there. He pushed the thought aside. They guided the hikers back down the ridge, radios buzzing with Thomas's updates. By the time they regrouped at the clearing, the wind had picked up and smoke threaded visibly through the trees. The lightning strike had found purchase after all. "Fire's east of here," Thomas said grimly. "Maybe 2 acres, moving fast with this wind. We'll need to call in a crew." James scanned the dark treetops where a faint orange glow pulsed like a warning beacon. "We'll escort these 2 back to their camp, then double back to help containment." They moved quickly. The hikers clung close, whispering to each other, their eyes darting toward the shadows. Isabel tried to reassure them, but her own voice trembled. By the time they reached the hikers' campsite, James's radio caught a clean signal. He reported the fire, coordinates crisp and professional. Dispatch confirmed a crew was en route, but warned resources were stretched thin with other blazes across the range. "Figures," Thomas muttered, scanning the glow that now painted the horizon. "It's gonna be a long night." The Rangers hiked east to meet the fire. The forest grew hot and restless as they approached, smoke stinging their eyes. The fire hadn't spread wide yet, but flames licked up the trunks of lodgepole pines and raced along the underbrush, devouring dry needles in a crackling frenzy. James snapped into command mode. "Isabel, start a line here, clear brush, widen a break. Thomas, you and I will cut a trench. Evan, spot flare-ups and knock them down before they jump." Everyone moved. For the next brutal hour, they fought the fire with hand tools and sweat, hacking trenches, beating flames, smothering embers. The roar of the fire drowned out everything else. Through it all, James caught glimpses of Evan. The man worked tirelessly, but something about the way he moved set James on edge. He seemed too fast, too precise. Where others swung tools with strain, Evan handled the flames like he knew exactly where the fire would go next. His eyes glowed in the firelight, strange and unreadable. And once, just once, James thought he saw his skin shimmer, like something catching the light beneath the sweat. Then it was gone. James shoved the image aside and focused on the trench. Get a grip, stress and smoke. That's all. By the time the fire crew arrived, the worst of the blaze was contained. The Rangers staggered back, faces streaked with soot, muscles aching. "Good work," James told them. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Let's get water. Rest up a minute." The others collapsed onto packs. Evan didn't sit. He stood at the tree line, staring into the smoke as if waiting for something. James watched him, unease gnawing again. He told himself it was just exhaustion, but deep down, he knew better. The fire crews lingered long after the worst of the flames were smothered. Engines growled in the distance, lights sweeping across the trees as men and women in yellow Nomex shirts carried tools and shouted orders. For a while, the ridge felt alive again, not with terror, but with the rhythm of human effort. James leaned against a blackened pine, sipping from his canteen. His throat was raw from smoke, his muscles heavy with exhaustion. He forced himself to breathe slowly, steadily. Fires always stole more from you than you expected. Isabel sat slumped a few yards away, helmet dangling from her fingers. She looked pale, shadows carved deep beneath her eyes. "I can't shake it," she murmured. "Those hikers, what they said about hearing something. I kept expecting to see eyes in the smoke." James offered her the canteen. "Exhaustion plays tricks. Sound carries weird in storms. Trees twist it. You know that." She nodded, but her expression stayed clouded. Thomas joined them, dropping heavily onto a log. His shirt was streaked with ash, his jaw clenched. "This fire's just a taste of what the season's going to be. We've had too little rain, too much wind. The whole range is a tinderbox." James wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "We'll handle it, like we always do." But even as he said it, his gaze flicked to Evan. The man hadn't sat down once. He stood at the edge of the fire line, staring into the trees with his hands loose at his sides. Not alert exactly. More like waiting, watching. James pushed himself off the pine. "I'm gonna check the perimeter. Make sure nothing's flaring back up." "Take Evan. No one goes alone," Thomas said without looking up. James bit back a sigh. "Yeah, sure." They walked into the smoke-thick woods, headlamps cutting narrow tunnels of light. The fire still smoldered in patches, glowing red under charred logs. James kept a Pulaski in his grip, ready to hack apart anything, reigniting. "Quiet out here," he muttered. Evan said nothing. His eyes scanned the trees, unblinking. James cleared his throat. "You tracked those prints earlier. You got an eye for it?" "Better than most." "How's that?" Evan glanced at him briefly. "Call it instinct." James grunted. "Instinct's just experience disguised. You've been out here for a long time?" "Long enough." That was all he offered. His voice didn't waver, didn't fill the silence the way most men did on night patrol. It was like talking to a stone. They passed a cluster of burned stumps, smoke curling upward like ghosts. The ground dipped into a shallow hollow where the fire hadn't touched. Here the earth looked different, churned, as though something had clawed upward from beneath. James crouched, lamp sweeping across the dirt. The soil was loose, broken in strange patterns. Not the clean dig of an animal burrow, but something broader, deeper. "You see this?" he asked. Evan crouched beside him, gaze locked on the churned soil. His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering. Probably ground squirrels, or erosion. "Erosion doesn't leave claw marks." James traced a groove with his glove. It was long, sharp. Evan's lips twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Maybe you've got bigger squirrels up here than you think." James studied him. The firelight caught the side of Evan's face, and for the briefest instant, James swore he saw a strange shimmer beneath the reflecting light again. He blinked. Gone. Just soot and sweat. "You okay?" Evan asked. James stood quickly. "Fine. Let's keep moving." They returned to camp near dawn. The fire was officially contained, crews dispersing to other assignments. Smoke drifted in thin veils over the ridge. Thomas was already breaking down gear. Isabel still looked pale, though she forced a tired smile. "Perimeter clear?" "Yeah," James said. He hesitated. "But there's something you should see tomorrow. Weird soil disturbance. Might be nothing, but worth checking." Thomas nodded. "We'll log it. For now, let's get some rest. We're stretched thin." They set camp a short distance from the blackened ridge. The ground was cold, hard, but James barely noticed. His body screamed for sleep. Still, long after the others had bedded down, James lay awake. He listened to the wind hiss through the burned trees. He tried to convince himself the claw marks were just stress, just his mind twisting ordinary shapes into threats. But then he heard it. Movement, beyond the circle of camp. Soft, deliberate. He sat up, hand going to his flashlight. The sound faded. Evan's sleeping bag was empty. James froze, breath shallow. He scanned the camp. Thomas snored softly. Isabel shifted in her sleep. Only Evan was gone. James slipped on his boots and crept to the tree line. The forest loomed black and silent. No footsteps, no light, nothing. He stayed there for a long minute, straining to hear. Eventually, he forced himself back to his bag. When dawn came, Evan was there, laying as if he'd never moved. James said nothing, but inside, unease coiled tighter. The morning came cold and gray, clouds blotting the sky. They packed up, shoulders heavy with fatigue. The plan was to swing back through the valleys, check on ranger stations cut off by the storm, then return to base for resupply. By midday, they reached a narrow ravine where steam curled from cracks in the rock. A sulphurous tang bit at James's nose. "Hot springs?" Isabel asked, wrinkling her. "Too far north for any I know of," Thomas said. He crouched near a vent, frowning. "And this ain't spring water, it's gas seeping." James scanned the ridge above. The vents dotted the slope like open wounds. The earth was cracked, blackened around the edges, as though scorched from beneath. Something about it chilled him, deeper than the fire had. "We'll mark it, report to geology," Thomas said. But James couldn't shake the sense that the ground itself was breathing. Evan lingered near the vents, gaze fixed on the dark openings. His expression was unreadable, almost hungry. James watched him for a long time. The unease from the night before gnawed harder. He wanted to confront him, demand where he'd gone, why he kept staring into shadows, like he belonged to them. But he bit it back. "Not yet. Get your proof first." They camped that night in a sheltered hollow. The storm broke overhead, rain hammering the tents, wind rattling branches. Sleep came in broken fits. James dreamed of scales under skin, of eyes glowing in the smoke. When he woke, Evan was gone again. This time James followed. He slipped from his tent, boots sinking into mud. He moved quietly, every sense alive. The rain had thinned to a drizzle, moonlight breaking through shredded clouds. He found Evan at the ridge above camp, standing over one of the vents. The man's head was tilted back, eyes closed, as if listening to something deep underground. For a moment, James thought he saw steam curl around him, forming shapes, elongated limbs, and something like claws. Then Evan opened his eyes, round, human, normal. James ducked back into the shadows, heart hammering. "You're not crazy," he told himself. "Something's wrong with him. You just don't know what yet." By the time dawn burned through the clouds, James had made his choice. He wouldn't say anything yet, not without proof. Thomas would chalk it up to stress. Isabel would look at him like he'd lost his mind. So he'd watch, wait, gather signs. Because one thing had become clear to James Wolfe on that storm-soaked ridge. Whatever was happening in these mountains, Evan Cross was not what he claimed to be. And if James was right, the truth was buried not just in the caves and vents scattered through the Rockies, but in the dark, shifting heart of Evan himself. The storm passed in ragged intervals, leaving the forest dripping and raw. By late morning, the radio crackled with new chatter from the district office. Static cut across the voices, but one call came through clear enough to make Thomas frown. "Repeat, Station West. Trailhead 11 vandalized. Lockers ripped open. We've got damage. That doesn't match. Human tools." James exchanged a look with Isabel. "Teenagers?" Thomas shook his head. "Teenagers? Not likely." He adjusted the dial, listening to the faint response. "They're requesting a sweep. We'll take it." They shouldered packs and started down the service trail toward the western ridge. The hike was long, silence stretching between them. The storm had loosened rocks. Twice they had to pick their way across new slides. When they reached the trailhead, James felt his gut twist. The wooden kiosks were shredded. Thick gouges raked through the posts, deep enough to peel back splinters in curling strips. Trail maps were torn from their frames. The plexiglass cracked like it had been struck with a hammer. The steel lockers meant for food storage had been twisted, not pried with a tool, but warped as though something with massive strength had gripped the metal and crushed it. Isabel knelt, brushing at the mud. No tire tracks, no boot prints. James crouched beside her. The soil bore faint depressions, long and narrow. Not quite human, not quite animal. Bear? She asked uncertainly. Bears don't leave symmetrical claw marks, James muttered. He traced the grooves on the wood, each one evenly spaced, precise. Thomas took a long breath, jaw tight. We'll log it as vandalism for now. No point stirring panic. James rose, staring into the dripping forest. He could almost feel eyes watching from the tree line. Behind him, Evan laid a hand on the twisted locker. His fingers lingered over the warped steel, expression unreadable. Then he stepped back without a word. By mid-afternoon, another call came over the radio. A hiker had found a dead moose, off-trail near the southern creek, and reported it to Fish and Game. The local officers were spread thin with the fire recovery, so Thomas's team was closest. The carcass lay in a muddy clearing, steam rising faintly in the cold air. James's stomach tightened as he approached. The moose had been gutted with surgical precision, not torn by predators, not eaten. The chest cavity was opened cleanly, as if by a blade, organs exposed, but untouched. What the hell? Isabel said. James knelt, gloved hands steady as he examined the wounds. No teeth marks, no tearing, just an incision. A bear doesn't do this. Wolves don't. Not even mountain lions. Thomas swore under his breath. Who the hell would... It's not human. The words slipped from James before he could stop them. He looked up to find Thomas staring at him hard. Evan crouched on the other side of the carcass, eyes locked on the wounds. He reached out not to touch, but to hover his hand above the open chest, as if feeling for heat. James swallowed. We should report it. Bag samples, call Fish and Game. Thomas nodded stiffly. Yeah, bag it. But James couldn't shake the feeling that Evan already knew what was killing the animals. This is the end of Chapter 4. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for the next chapter.